have driven trucks for many years, and most nights on the road feel the same. Long highways, empty rest areas, the sound of the engine, the slow movement of white lines under the headlights. I always thought I understood fear on the road. I thought fear was just tired eyes, rough weather, or a tight delivery schedule. I learned I was wrong on a trip through a long and lonely stretch of highway across the desert, where there were no towns for many miles and only a few small gas stations that stayed open at odd hours. That trip changed how I see the road and how I see myself, and I still think about it even now when I sit in a quiet place and try to sleep. I picked up a load of metal parts from a warehouse early in the morning and started my route across several states. The day felt normal at first. The sky was clear, the road was dry, and traffic was light. I followed the same routine I always followed. I checked my mirrors, watched my gauges, and kept my speed steady. The radio played softly, but I barely heard it because my mind was locked into that slow rhythm of driving for long hours. I passed through a few small towns, refueled once, and kept going into the evening as the daylight faded. When night came, the road changed in a way that only truckers understand. The world shrank down to the space inside the cab, the dashboard lights, and the bright path of my headlights. Everything outside that light turned into darkness that looked heavy and endless. I kept driving because my schedule required me to cover more miles before stopping. The highway stretched straight ahead with no curves, no buildings, and no signs of life except for the occasional distant glow of another vehicle far ahead or far behind me. After some time, I noticed a small old car coming up behind me. I did not think much of it at first because vehicles come and go all the time on highways. But this car stayed behind me at the same distance for a very long time. It did not pass me even when the lane beside me stayed empty for miles. It simply stayed back there, always at the edge of my mirror, never closer, never farther. I tried to ignore it and focus on the road, but after an hour I could not stop thinking about it. I felt a strange pressure in my chest. It was not fear at first, only discomfort, like something was slightly wrong, but I could not see what it was. The road grew darker as clouds covered the moon. The desert around me turned into a black, empty void. There were no lights anywhere, no houses, no gas stations, nothing but sand, brush, and long open land that felt abandoned. The car behind me was still there. I kept thinking that maybe the driver was tired and just following another vehicle to feel safer, but something about the way it stayed perfectly behind me did not feel normal. Hours passed like that. My eyes burned, my neck felt stiff, and my hands stayed tight on the steering wheel. I could feel sweat on my back even though the air inside the cab was cool. I kept thinking about stopping soon, but there were no rest areas on that stretch of highway, no wide exits, nothing except small dirt pull-off areas that looked unsafe in the dark. Then I saw a sign for a closed way station ahead. It was one of those old ones that only opened during the day. I had passed that road many times before, and I remembered the way station had a large empty parking lot. I decided to pull in and stop for a while to check my truck and rest for a few minutes. I wanted to see if the car would keep going or follow me in. That thought stayed in my mind like a heavy stone. I slowed down and turned toward the way station. The car behind me slowed down too. I watched it in my mirror, and my heart started beating faster. The way station building looked dark and empty. The parking lot lights were broken. Only my headlights and my hazard lights lit the cracked pavement. The place looked abandoned, with weeds growing through the concrete and faded paint on the small building. I parked my truck near the far edge of the lot, facing the exit so I could leave fast if I needed to. I turned off the engine and sat in silence for a moment. The sudden quiet felt loud in my ears, like all the noise in my head had nowhere to go. I looked in my mirror and saw the car slowly entering the lot. It stopped several spaces away, but the engine stayed running and the headlights stayed off, which made the car look like a dark shape in the night. I sat still and tried to breathe slowly. I did not want to step outside at first. I watched the car and waited. Minutes passed. The car did not move. I felt an uneasy feeling moving through my body, like cold air seeping under my skin. I finally climbed down from the cab to check my tires and trailer using my flashlight. I kept telling myself that I was only being cautious, that nothing was really happening, that maybe the driver was just resting. But I could feel eyes on me the entire time. As I walked around the truck, I noticed footprints in the dust near the edge of the pavement, old and faded, leading toward the back of the lot where it turned darker. There were also pieces of trash, broken glass, and old tire marks like vehicles had turned sharply or stopped suddenly there in the past. The place felt wrong in a quiet way, like many things had happened there and none of them had been good. When I finished checking the truck, I climbed back into the cab and locked the doors. I turned off the interior lights and sat in the dark so I could see outside more clearly. The car was still there. I could barely see its shape, but I knew someone was inside because I could feel it. My hands stayed near the steering wheel as I thought about whether I should leave or continue resting. I felt tired, but I also felt trapped. After a long silent stretch, the car finally moved. It rolled farther into the lot, slow and careful, like the driver did not want to make noise. It stopped behind my trailer where I could not see it clearly in my mirrors. I felt fear growing deep inside me. I leaned forward and tried to see better, but the back of the lot was too dark. I reached for my flashlight, but then I stopped moving and listened. I heard soft footsteps outside, faint but real, scraping lightly over the pavement near the side of my trailer. The sound came and went, like someone was walking slowly and stopping every few steps. My heart pounded hard against my ribs. I felt the muscles in my arms tighten as I sat perfectly still in the darkness of my cab. The footsteps moved closer, then faded, then came back again. I did not see anyone, but I could sense their presence near the back of the truck. I imagined someone checking my trailer doors, looking for something to take, maybe trying to climb up onto the steps on the side. I knew many criminals targeted trucks on lonely highways, especially at night, hoping to steal cargo or fuel or worse. The thought filled my mind with images I did not want to think about, but I could not push them away. I waited in silence for a long time. The air inside the cab felt heavy. My breath sounded loud in my own ears. I could feel every small vibration of the truck as the wind moved past it. Then I heard a faint sound of metal being touched near the back doors of the trailer. It was soft but clear, like someone testing the handle or pulling on a latch. I stayed still and watched my mirrors, but I saw nothing. I knew then that I could not stay parked. I turned the key slowly, and the engine came to life. The sound of the motor broke the silence and echoed across the empty lot. I saw a quick movement near the back of the truck, a shadow pulling away. I shifted into gear and rolled forward, keeping my eyes on the mirrors. The car near the far part of the lot turned its headlights on and began moving too. It followed me toward the exit. I drove back onto the highway. My hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel. The car stayed behind me again, but this time it kept a closer distance. The empty highway stretched ahead, dark and endless. I checked my phone for signal, but there was almost none in that area. I could not call anyone, and there were no towns nearby. All I could do was keep driving and hope to reach a brighter, safer place. The road felt longer than before. My mind stayed sharp, every sense awake, every thought focused on what was behind me and what might happen next. The car drifted from side to side sometimes, then pulled back in line, like the driver was studying me or my truck. The behavior did not feel random. It felt like pressure, like someone trying to make me nervous or make me stop again. After another long stretch, I saw a distant gas station sign glowing weakly in the darkness. The light looked old and tired, but it was still a sign of life. I aimed for it, hoping there would be cameras, people, maybe even security lights around the pumps. I stayed on the highway until I reached the exit, and then I turned. The car followed again, never leaving my trail. I pulled into the station lot and parked near the brightest area I could find. The place was mostly empty. One small car sat near the far edge of the lot, but I did not see anyone inside. The building looked closed for the night, but the pump lights stayed on. I kept the engine running and watched my mirrors. The car that had followed me stopped near the entrance to the lot. Not too close, not too far, like the driver was still deciding what to do next. I sat there for a long time, watching and waiting. The fear inside me was not loud anymore. It felt slow and deep, like something that had settled into my bones. I realized then that this was not just about theft. This was about control, about someone using the emptiness of the road and the darkness of the night to make another person feel powerless and alone. Eventually, the car backed up and drove away. It turned onto the road and disappeared into the night without speeding, without any sign of hurry. It left as quietly as it had followed me. I did not move for several minutes. I sat there, breathing slowly, trying to calm my body, trying to understand what had just happened. When I finally left the gas station, I drove toward the nearest town and stopped at a well-lit rest area near a small police outpost. I did not sleep much that night. I checked my trailer again and saw faint marks near the latch, like someone had tried to test it but failed to open it. There was also a small scratch near the side steps of the cab, as if a shoe or tool had slid across the metal. The next morning, when the sun rose and the world looked normal again, I felt strange. Everything looked safe in daylight. The highway looked harmless. The way station looked quiet and empty. The desert looked wide and calm. But my mind remembered the empty lot, the dark shape of the car, the slow footsteps outside my truck, and the sound of metal being touched in the middle of the night with no one around to help. I finished my delivery later that day, but something inside me was different. I realized how easily a person can become trapped by distance, darkness, and silence. I realized how vulnerable a lone driver can be on roads where no one is watching and no one will hear anything if something goes wrong. I started changing my habits after that trip. I stopped parking in abandoned lots, even for a short rest. I chose brighter places with cameras and other trucks. I kept my doors locked at all times. I stayed more aware of any vehicle that stayed behind me longer than it should. The memory of that night stayed with me, not because anything dramatic or violent happened, but because of how real the danger felt even when nothing fully unfolded. The fear was not about monsters or ghosts or anything unreal. The fear came from knowing that someone had followed me on purpose, watched me in the dark, walked near my truck when they thought I would not notice, and tested my trailer like it was a prize waiting to be taken. The fear came from understanding how small and isolated a truck can feel when the world around it goes silent. The ending of that night was clear in my mind. I made it out because I trusted my instincts, because I chose to move when the situation felt wrong, and because I refused to stay still in a place that felt unsafe. Nothing supernatural happened, nothing mysterious or magical, only a simple and real situation where another human being with unknown intentions tried to use darkness and emptiness as an advantage. I lived through it, and I learned from it, and I carry that lesson with me every time I drive through long, dark stretches of highway where the only things that exist are my headlights, my thoughts, and the quiet memory of a night when danger stood just a few steps away from my truck in the shadows of an abandoned way station. Since that trip, I think about every lonely stretch of road differently. I remember the silent car behind me, the dark parking lot, the slow steps outside my cab, and the moment I heard metal tremble under a stranger's hand. I remember how the darkness did not move, how the air did not change, how the world kept going while I sat frozen with fear in the middle of nowhere. And I remember how I drove away from that place and chose to survive, not because I was brave, but because I understood that sometimes the only protection a person has on the road is the choice to trust their fear, to act before something worse happens, and to never forget how real danger can be when the world is silent and the night is deep and empty. That night did not end with noise or chaos. It ended with movement, distance, and quiet survival. It ended with me leaving before something happened that I would not be able to walk away from. It ended with lessons that still follow me through every mile I drive. And even now, when I park my truck in a bright, busy place and lock my doors and try to sleep, I sometimes feel that old weight in my chest, and I remember the shape of that car in my mirror, the empty lot under the broken lights, and the simple, real fear of being alone on the road with someone who did not mean well hiding just beyond the edge of the light. I remember that night on the highway like it is carved into my mind, and even though time has passed, I can still feel the same heavy fear in my chest when I think about it. I had been driving trucks for many years, and I thought I had seen almost everything that could happen on the road, from bad weather to broken brakes to near misses with careless drivers. But nothing felt like that one long night when I was hauling a refrigerated trailer across empty desert roads, far from towns and far from people, with only my truck, my tired body, and the dark miles around me. It started near the end of a long run. I had already been driving for many hours, and my body felt heavy and sore from sitting in the same position. The road ahead looked straight and empty, stretching into the distance with no signs of life. The sky was dark and the land on both sides of the highway looked flat and dead, like something that had been forgotten a long time ago. I kept watching the fuel gauge, the temperature readings, the mirrors, and the white lines on the road, trying to stay focused and awake. I could feel the dull ache in my back and shoulders, and my eyes felt dry and tired. The load in my trailer was simple refrigerated produce that needed to be delivered on time. I had planned my route to avoid traffic in big cities, so I ended up on long rural highways where there was nothing but sand, empty land, and sometimes an old closed gas station or a broken sign leaning to one side. It looked quiet, but the kind of quiet that makes you feel small and alone, like you are the only living thing for miles. As I drove deeper into the night, I began to notice something strange. The road felt different, like the pavement had small bumps or cracks that I had not seen earlier. The steering wheel had a light vibration in it, not strong, but enough that I could feel it in my hands. At first, I thought maybe it was just the road surface changing, because some stretches of highway are rougher than others. But the vibration stayed, and after a while it became stronger and more steady, like something was wrong with the truck itself. I checked the dashboard again and again. The engine temperature looked normal. The oil pressure was fine. The air pressure in the brakes was steady. I tried to listen to the sound of the engine and the tires, and even though the cabin was filled with the low rumble of the diesel engine, I could sense something deeper beneath it, like a faint rubbing or grinding sound that came and went depending on my speed. I slowed down a little and kept my eyes on the mirrors. The trailer looked straight behind me. No swaying, no strange movement. But the feeling in the wheel and through the seat grew stronger. I felt a tightness building inside my chest, a worry that something serious might be going wrong. And out here in the dark, empty desert, the last thing I wanted was a major breakdown. I kept driving for a while longer, trying to convince myself it was nothing, but the fear inside me kept growing. The road stretched on with no rest area, no lights, no signs of a town. Just endless darkness and the cold glow of my headlights on the asphalt. I thought about how far I might be from the nearest repair shop and how long it would take for help to reach me if the truck stopped working completely. Soon, the vibration turned into something worse. I could feel a slight pull to the right side of the truck, like the truck wanted to drift off the lane. I tightened my grip on the wheel and corrected it, but the pull came back again. My heart started to beat faster, and I felt sweat forming on my back, even though the inside of the cabin was cool. I knew I had to stop and check before things got worse. I looked ahead and saw nothing but dark space and road. No shoulder lights, no marked rest area, no gas station. But I knew if I kept going, I might make the problem bigger, and if something like a tire blew out at high speed, it could flip the trailer or send me off the road. So I slowed down slowly, turned on my hazard lights, and pulled onto the side of the highway where the gravel shoulder met the road. The moment the truck came to a stop, the silence outside felt huge and heavy. The engine stayed running, but everything else around me was empty and still. I sat there for a few seconds, just breathing, staring out into the darkness, gathering the courage to step down and walk around the truck. I did not want to get out because the night felt strange and unfriendly, but I knew I had to check. I opened the door and stepped down onto the gravel. The ground felt rough and loose under my boots. The air was cold and dry, and the wind was almost non-existent. There were no sounds of insects, no animals, no distant engines, nothing. Only the faint hum of my truck and the soft ticking sounds of metal cooling under the night air. I walked slowly along the side of the trailer, running my hand along the metal, feeling the cold surface. I checked the tires one by one with my flashlight, looking for damage, bulges, missing chunks of rubber. First, everything looked normal. The treads were worn but still fine. The rims looked straight. I crouched down and touched each tire to make sure none of them felt loose or overheated. When I reached the rear tires on the right side, I saw it. One of the inside dual tires had a long crack along the sidewall. The rubber looked torn and weak, like it had been scraping and heating for miles. I felt a wave of fear wash through me because I knew that if that tire gave out at high speed, it could destroy the rim or damage the axle. I understood that I needed to get it fixed as soon as possible, but there was nothing around me except empty desert and a dark, endless road. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the damaged tire while the windless night pressed against my skin. I could feel the silence like a weight. I looked around and saw no cars passing, no headlights, no sign of human life at all. It was like the world had gone quiet and empty, and I was the last person left. I climbed back into the cab and shut the door. The inside of the truck felt slightly safer, but not by much. I pulled up the route map on my device and tried to figure out where the nearest town or service station was. The screen showed that the nearest place with a tire shop was many miles away in the direction I had already been heading. Going back would take even longer, and there was nothing behind me either. I decided I would have to keep going, but very slowly, and hope the tire held up until I reached help. I did not like the idea, but I felt like I had no real choice. I took a deep breath, shifted into gear, and pulled back onto the highway. The truck moved forward, but now I felt every vibration, every little sound, every small shift in the weight of the trailer. I was hyper-aware of everything, and my fear kept growing with each passing minute. As I drove slowly along the dark road, something else began to bother me. I kept seeing faint shapes far back on the road behind me in the mirrors, like something moving in the distance, but when I stared harder, there was nothing there. I told myself it was just my tired eyes and the reflections of my own hazard lights bouncing off the road markers. But the unease stayed. After a while, I noticed another detail that made my heart pound harder. When I checked my side mirror again, I saw faint tire tracks in the thin layer of dust on the shoulder of the road where I had stopped earlier. The pattern looked strange, like another vehicle had stopped there at some point, but I had not seen anyone around me the whole time I was parked. The thought made me feel watched, even though I knew logically it could have been old tracks from days earlier. I kept driving, mile after slow mile, feeling more alone and more tense than I had ever felt before. My arms ached from holding the wheel so firmly. The night around me felt thick and heavy, like the darkness itself was pressing against the glass of the windows, trying to get in. The road ahead looked endless, and the desert on both sides looked like a black ocean of nothing. The damaged tire continued to worry me. The vibration came and went, and every time I heard a new sound or felt a stronger shake, my chest tightened and I wondered if this would be the moment it failed. My thoughts kept going to worst-case scenarios. I imagined the tire exploding, the trailer swaying out of control, the truck rolling into the sand, the load spilling everywhere. My body trapped inside twisted metal with no one around to help. After some time, I saw a faint light far ahead in the distance. It was not bright and it did not look like a town, but it was something. It looked like a small single light, maybe from a building or a post. The sight gave me a little hope, and I kept moving toward it slowly, mile after mile, watching it grow very slowly larger as the road brought me closer. The closer I got, the more I realized it was not a town or a gas station. It was an old, run-down rest stop with a faded building, cracked asphalt, and a single dim light above a broken parking area. The place looked abandoned, like it had not been used in years. The roof of the small building sagged in the middle, and the paint was peeling. There were no other vehicles, no working signs, no vending machines or functioning restrooms, only an empty shell of what used to be a rest stop. Even though it looked abandoned, I felt like I needed to stop there for a moment to check the tire again and calm myself before continuing. I pulled into the cracked parking lot and rolled to a slow stop. The dim light overhead flickered a little and gave the place a sick, uneasy look. The ground was covered with gravel, dust, and small weeds that had grown through the cracks in the pavement. I shut off the engine and sat there in silence. The sudden stillness felt even more disturbing here than on the side of the highway. The air felt colder, and the old building looked like it was watching me in the dark. I could not shake the feeling that I should not be there, but I forced myself to get out of the truck again and check the tire. When I stepped down and walked to the back of the trailer, I saw that the crack in the tire had gotten worse. The rubber was separating more, and there were small threads sticking out. It looked dangerously close to failing. I felt my stomach twist in fear, because now I knew for sure that I could not drive much farther without risking disaster. I stood there in the dim light, staring at the tire, thinking about what to do. There was no phone signal strong enough to call for help. There were no other vehicles, no houses, no people. Just me, the broken tire, and the dead rest stop in the middle of nowhere. The quiet around me felt wrong, like something hidden in the darkness was waiting and watching. I went back into the cab and sat there again, thinking and breathing slowly, trying to calm my thoughts. I knew I would have to stay there until morning, or at least until some other driver passed by who might be able to help or contact a service. The idea of sitting there alone all night made me feel uneasy, but I did not see another safe option. Hours passed slowly. The night outside stayed silent and empty, but my fear did not fade. I kept checking the mirrors, looking at the shadows around the parking lot, studying the dark edges of the building and the long cracks in the pavement. Every small sound from the truck made me jump. The metal expanded and contracted with the temperature change, and each soft tick or creak made my heart beat faster. At some point, I began to feel like there was something else nearby. I did not see anything, but I felt it. A strange pressure in my chest, like the space around me was not as empty as it looked. I watched the dusty ground and the edges of the light as the darkness swallowed everything beyond it. I began to notice faint marks in the dirt near the building, like old footprints or tire tracks, but they were faded and broken, hard to read, and they made my imagination run wild. The fear grew stronger because it came from something very real. The fact that I was stuck, vulnerable, and alone with no control over what might happen. I could not leave, I could not drive far, and I could not defend myself very well if anything went wrong. I realized how small and weak a person can feel when the world becomes wide, empty, and silent. At some point during that long night, I heard a faint sound in the distance. Not a voice, not speech, but something like a distant thump, like something hitting metal or wood far away. My whole body froze. I sat still, hardly breathing, my heart pounding in my chest. I kept staring into the darkness, but I could not see where the sound had come from. The sound came again, this time a little closer. It echoed softly in the empty desert air. I felt a deep fear inside me, not because of anything supernatural, but because I knew that out here, any unknown sound could mean danger. Could be a wild animal or it could be a person. I thought about crime in lonely places, about stories of robberies and assaults at abandoned rest stops, about desperate people who might see a lone trucker as an easy target. I stayed locked inside the cab and tried to stay quiet. I did not move and I listened carefully. For a while, there was nothing again, only silence. Then I heard the soft crunch of gravel, like someone or something was walking slowly across the parking lot, just outside the reach of the light. I could not see anything clearly, but I could feel the presence of movement out there. The steps were slow and careful, like whoever or whatever it was did not want to be noticed. My hands felt cold and numb even though I was sweating. I stayed as still as possible, afraid that even a small movement might make noise. Time passed slowly, and eventually the sounds faded away. I did not know if the person or animal had left or if it was still out there in the shadows. I stayed awake the rest of the night, my eyes tired but my mind too afraid to close them. I watched the sky until I finally saw the first faint light of morning appear in the distance. When the sunrise finally came, I felt a small wave of relief. The world began to look real again. The shadows faded, and the empty land around the rest stop became visible. I climbed out of the truck again in the daylight and walked around the area. I saw footprints in the dust near the parking lot, fresh ones, not old ones like near the building. They were human footprints, leading toward the back of the broken structure and then disappearing into the desert. Seeing those footprints made my stomach twist again, because now I knew it had not been my imagination. Someone had been moving around that place during the night while I sat alone in my truck. I never saw the person, but I knew they were real, and they had been close to me while I was stranded and helpless. As soon as there was enough light and my phone signal grew stronger, I called for roadside assistance. It took many hours before help finally arrived. While waiting, I stayed inside the cab, watching the empty desert and those faint footprints, thinking about what could have happened if I had stepped out at the wrong time, or if the stranger had tried to break into the truck while I slept. When the repair truck finally replaced the damaged tire and inspected the others, I was able to leave that abandoned rest stop. As I drove away, I kept looking in the mirrors at the building shrinking behind me, thinking about the quiet, the darkness, the unknown person walking in the night, and how close danger had come without me even seeing it clearly. The experience changed how I look at my job and my life on the road. The fear I felt that night was not about monsters or ghosts. It was about real-world danger, about isolation, vulnerability, and how quickly things can go wrong in places where no one is around to help. I learned how small I really am compared to the empty miles and the cold spaces where people rarely go. Even now, when I drive at night on long, empty highways, I remember that cracked tire, that abandoned rest stop, the footprints in the dust, and the quiet steps in the darkness. I remember how fear can grow in silence, how the real world can be more terrifying than any story, and how sometimes survival is not about strength, but about caution, patience, and understanding how fragile you are. That night ended with me alive, the truck repaired, and the road ahead open again, but the fear stayed with me. It stayed as a lesson and a reminder of how close I came to something I could not see, something real and human and dangerous that moved out there in the night while I sat alone in my cab, waiting and listening, knowing that in a place like that, there is no one to rely on but yourself. I had been driving trucks for many years, and I always thought I understood what the road could do to a person. I thought I knew every kind of fear that came with lonely highways, late nights, empty fuel stations, long stretches of desert road, and the sound of the engine filling the cab like a second heartbeat. I thought I understood how the dark could play tricks on my mind, and how fatigue could turn simple things into heavy thoughts that stayed with me for hours. But there was one haul I made across a long, flat stretch of road in the middle of a wide, empty state that showed me a different kind of fear. It was not loud or sudden. It was slow and steady and real. It stayed with me even after the trip was over, and I still think about it when I drive alone at night. This load was simple on paper. It was a refrigerated trailer full of packaged meat that needed to go from a plant outside a small town to a warehouse near a coastal city. The route crossed long roads where there were few towns, only small gas stops, closed motels, and old buildings that looked like they had been left behind by time. The company warned me about strong winds in the area, narrow shoulders, and limited cell service, but I had dealt with worse roads before, so I did not think much of it. I planned the route, checked the tires, checked the trailer, made sure everything inside was sealed and locked, filled the fuel tanks, and started the trip early in the afternoon so I could clear the first long stretch before midnight. The first hours felt normal. The sky was bright, the sun low and wide, and the road felt empty but calm. The air was dry, and I saw dust blowing across fields and empty land on both sides of the highway. The hum of the engine mixed with the sound of the road under the wheels. I watched mile markers pass one after another, and the world felt flat and endless. I felt comfortable in my seat, with my hands steady on the wheel, the cold air from the vents on my face, and the trailer pulling smooth behind me. As the sun began to fall, the shadows grew longer and darker, and the light turned orange and then red. The sky slowly faded into deep blue, then black. The road ahead became a narrow strip that my headlights cut out of the darkness. The land on both sides turned into shapes that were hard to read. Fences looked like thin black lines. Old trees stood like tall shadows. Sometimes I saw shapes that looked like small buildings or rusted cars far back from the road. The silence outside the cab felt heavier as the night grew deeper. There were no houses for miles, and the few rest areas I passed looked empty. Some had lights that flickered. Some had trash blowing across the pavement. Others looked completely dead, with broken signs and old benches that looked like no one had touched them in years. I kept going because I wanted to reach the next fuel station before stopping. My log time was fine, and I felt awake, but I could feel a slow tiredness building at the back of my head. The road kept stretching straight and flat for what felt like forever. There were no other trucks around. I saw a few distant headlights from small cars once in a while, but they disappeared as quickly as they appeared. I felt like I was the only person moving through a huge empty space, and the only sound in the world was my engine and the steady vibration running through the floor of the cab. At one point, I noticed something strange in the mirror. It was only a faint shadow at first, a small shape near the back of my trailer, low and close to the frame. I thought maybe it was a trick of the light, or maybe a dark smudge on the mirror. I leaned forward and moved my head slightly to change the angle of the mirror. For a moment, it disappeared, and I assumed my eyes were just tired. After another mile, I checked again. This time, I saw the shape clearer. Something dark was near the rear end of the trailer, almost like a figure pressed close to the metal, holding on to something under the frame. It was hard to see clearly because of the night and the way the trailer lights cast shadows across the back. I felt cold air run across my skin as I realized what I might be looking at. It looked like a person hanging on beneath the trailer. My first thought was that I must be wrong. Maybe it was just mud or a strap or something loose casting a strange shadow. I tried to stay calm. I knew the worst thing to do on an empty road at night was panic. I focused on the lane, kept the wheel steady, and slowed down just a little to see if the shape moved or changed. As I slowed, the weight of the trailer shifted, and I felt a small vibration that did not feel normal. It felt like something reacted to my change of speed. I looked again. The shape was still there. I felt a tightness in my chest. The idea of someone hiding under my trailer, gripping metal and riding along the highway in the dark, felt unreal and frightening in a way that was hard to explain. It was not dramatic or loud. It was quiet and steady, like a presence that should not be there. The thought of it made the inside of the cab feel smaller, even though I was alone. There was no place to stop safely right away. The shoulders were narrow and dropped off into dirt and rough ground. The next rest area sign said 15 miles. I knew I had to stay calm and keep control of the truck. I kept my speed steady, tried to keep my breathing slow, and stayed focused on the road ahead while my mind kept circling around the same thought. Someone might be under the trailer in the dark, inches above the road, holding on while I drove 70,000 pounds of truck and cargo across a lonely stretch of highway. As I drove, I started to think about how a person could even get there. Maybe they climbed on when I stopped at the plant. Maybe they hid near the loading dock and waited for the right moment. Maybe they were trying to cross the region unnoticed. Maybe they were desperate or scared or running from something. Or maybe they had bad intentions. The not knowing made it worse. The darkness outside the truck felt heavier with every mile. I kept checking the mirrors every few seconds. Sometimes the shape looked clearer. Sometimes it faded into the shadows. The more I looked, the more real it seemed. I could see just enough to understand that whoever it was had their body pressed tight under the back of the trailer, legs tucked in, arms hooked onto the metal in some way that let them stay hidden from the rear lights and most of the open view of the road. I thought about the danger not only to me but to that person. If they slipped, they would fall onto the highway at full speed, and there would be nothing I could do. If they tried to climb further up, they could get caught in moving parts or crushed under the wheels. The idea of someone risking their life under my trailer made me feel uneasy in a deep way that settled into my stomach and stayed there. After what felt like a long time, I saw the glow of the rest area lights far ahead. The sign was old and half-faded, but the lot looked large enough to pull into safely. I slowed down more carefully than usual and eased the truck toward the exit lane. I kept glancing at the mirror to see if the shape moved. I thought maybe the person would jump off when they felt the truck slowing, but the shape stayed there, still pressed close and silent. The ramp curved slightly and led to a wide empty parking area with broken lines painted on cracked pavement. A few old light poles stood over the lot, some working, some dead. The place looked neglected, with weeds growing through cracks and trash scattered against low concrete barriers. There were no other trucks there, no cars, no signs of anyone nearby. I guided the truck into a spot near the far edge of the lot where the light was strongest. My hands felt stiff on the wheel. My heart was beating hard in my chest. As I came to a stop and set the brake, the cab went quiet except for the faint idle of the engine and the distant sound of insects in the night. The silence felt heavy. I sat for a moment without moving. I tried to think clearly. I did not want to get out right away. I wanted to listen first. I leaned slightly toward the window and turned off the engine. The sudden quiet felt strange and wide. Without the engine noise, every sound outside felt bigger. I heard the wind move across the empty lot. I heard the faint creaking of the trailer as the metal settled from the stop. I listened closely for any other sound, anything that might tell me what was under the trailer. After a few seconds, I heard a faint scrape from the back. It was soft, almost lost in the wind, but it was there. A small shift of weight on metal confirmed what I had feared. Someone was there. My skin felt tight. The thought of stepping out of the cab and walking back toward the trailer made me uneasy. I imagined someone crouched under the frame, hidden in shadows, maybe desperate, maybe dangerous. I imagined them watching my boots move across the pavement, waiting, breathing, thinking. The rest area was too empty and too quiet. If anything went wrong, there would be no one to help, no one even to hear. I stayed inside the cab. I locked the doors. I kept still and tried to think step by step. I had weak reception on my phone, but enough to see one faint bar. I thought about calling for help, but I also thought about how long it would take for anyone to get there. I was deep in the middle of nowhere, and emergency response would take time. I also thought about how the person under the trailer might panic if they heard sirens or saw flashing lights and could do something dangerous in fear. So I waited. Minutes felt long and slow. I kept my eyes on the mirrors, watching the glow of the trailer lights reflect off the pavement. I watched for any movement, any shift or shadow or small change. My breathing felt loud in the quiet cab. My hands rested on my legs, but I could feel tension in every muscle. After a while, I saw a faint movement at the back of the trailer, a slow shifting shape. It looked like the person was repositioning themselves, maybe stretching their arms, maybe adjusting their grip. I could not see their face. I could not see their eyes. I could only see the outline of their body, thin and dark, blending into the trailer frame. The night around me felt like it had weight. The empty lot, the silent road beyond, the dark land around the rest area, all of it felt wide and lonely. I felt very aware of how isolated I was, how far I was from help or noise or life. It made every small movement at the back of the truck feel sharper, more intense. I stayed there for a long time. I did not sleep. I did not relax. I stayed awake with my eyes on the mirrors and my mind on the strange quiet presence under my trailer. I thought about the long road still ahead. I thought about the risk of driving again with someone hidden so close to dangerous moving parts. I thought about what could happen if they slipped off at speed or tried to climb further up the frame. Near midnight, I felt my tiredness becoming stronger, but I did not want to close my eyes. I knew that driving again with that person under the trailer was dangerous, but staying there all night in that empty rest area felt dangerous too. I felt trapped between bad choices. At some point, I saw another small movement in the mirror. This time, the shape shifted closer to the rear edge of the trailer. It stayed there for a few seconds, then slowly disappeared down toward the pavement, out of sight. I felt my chest tighten again. I waited and watched. A moment later, I saw a shadow move along the side of the trailer near the ground. A thin figure slipped along the edge of the truck, staying low, moving slowly, almost crawling. They stayed in the darkest parts of the light, careful and deliberate. I could not see their face. I could only see the slow, cautious way they moved, like someone who had been holding onto metal for miles and whose body was stiff and tired. The figure moved toward the far side of the lot, staying close to the back of the trailer for a few moments, then sliding away toward the darkness beyond the light poles. I watched as they crossed into shadow and faded into the empty land beyond the pavement. There was no sound, no sudden movement, no sign of hesitation. They just disappeared into the dark. For a long time after that, I did not move. I stayed in the cab with my hands on the wheel, staring at the mirrors and the edge of the lot where the figure had vanished. The night felt even quieter than before. The rest area looked exactly the same. Cracked pavement, dead grass, broken signs, but everything felt different because I knew that someone had been there. Inches from my truck, hidden and silent for miles. Eventually, I stepped out of the cab. The air outside was cold and dry. The wind carried dust across the pavement. The smell of old asphalt and dry earth filled the air. I walked slowly toward the back of the trailer, my steps steady, my senses sharp. The light from the pole above me cast long shadows across the ground. I knelt near the rear frame and looked under the trailer. I saw marks on the metal where hands had gripped. I saw faint smudges on the frame, dirt rubbed smooth where weight had pressed against it. I saw the places where skin or clothing had scraped against sharp edges. There was no doubt anymore. Someone had held onto the trailer for a long distance. I stood there for a while with the wind moving past me, and I felt a strange mix of fear, relief, and unease. I did not know who the person was. I did not know why they had done it. I did not know where they had gone after they slipped into the dark. I only knew that they had been under my truck for miles, risking their life in silence while I drove through empty land, unaware for most of the trip that they were even there. I went back to the cab and sat in the seat. I closed my eyes for a moment, but I could still see the faint shape under the trailer, the slow movements, the small shifts in the dark. I could still feel the tightness in my chest from when I first understood what I was seeing. I waited a while before starting the engine again. When I finally did, the sound of it felt different, heavier, as if the truck itself carried the memory of what had happened. I drove the rest of the route with more caution than I had ever used before. I checked the mirrors constantly. I stopped more often and inspected the trailer each time. I felt more aware of every vibration, every sound, every small irregular movement of the load and the frame. The road still stretched long and empty, but it no longer felt calm. It felt like a place where things could happen quietly, without warning, hidden inside the dark. When I finally reached the warehouse and delivered the load, the morning light was pale and dull, and the world looked normal again. Workers moved around, forklifts beeped, and the noise and motion of the place felt strange after the silence of the night. But even in the daylight, the memory of the dark rest area and the figure beneath the trailer stayed with me. I walked around the truck one last time before leaving the site. I looked again at the underside of the trailer. I saw the same marks, the same worn spots where the person had held on. They were small and easy to overlook, but now they meant something to me. They were proof of a silent struggle that had happened just inches from the road, hidden in plain sight. I finished my paperwork, signed the delivery records, and drove away from the warehouse, but my mind stayed on that long stretch of night highway. I kept thinking about how easily I could have driven the entire route without ever knowing that a human being was clinging to the underside of my trailer, trusting their life to metal bars and rough bolts while the world moved past them in darkness. I thought about how many miles I had driven in my life without seeing everything that was really happening around me. I thought about how the road always felt empty, but maybe it was not as empty as it looked. Maybe there were always hidden stories unfolding in the shadows just beyond the reach of the headlights, quiet struggles that no one ever noticed. That trip changed the way I looked at the road. After that night, I always inspected the trailer more carefully. I always checked the underside before leaving a stop. I always paid attention to every strange shadow in the mirrors, every odd vibration, every quiet sound that did not belong. I no longer saw the empty highway as just space and distance. I saw it as a place where people sometimes did desperate things in silence. The ending of that story was not loud or dramatic. There was no crash, no chase, no sudden event. The ending was the moment I watched the figure disappear into the darkness beyond the rest area lights and realized that I would never know who they were or why they had taken such a risk. The ending was the long, quiet drive that followed, where every mile felt heavier because I understood what could happen without my knowledge. The ending was the way that night stayed with me long after the load was delivered and the trip was finished. Even now, when I drive through long stretches of empty land and the road feels wide and quiet, I remember that shape under the trailer and the soft scrape of weight on metal in the middle of the night. I remember how real and silent that fear felt, and how it changed the way I see the road forever. I spent most of my adult life on the road, moving heavy loads across long empty highways, watching towns pass by like small islands in a dark ocean. I always thought I understood the road. I thought I knew every sound my truck made, every strange feeling in my chest when I was tired, every risk that came with the job. But there was one night that changed the way I looked at everything. It still follows me when I close my eyes. It still sits heavy in my chest when I think about long, straight roads, dark shoulders, and the quiet spaces between towns. I had driven through storms, broken roads, snowy passes, and hot desert stretches with no shade. But this night was different because it was not about the weather, or the road, or bad luck. It was about how far fear can reach into a person when they are alone inside a giant machine moving through silent land. I was hauling a refrigerated trailer full of packaged meat, heading across a long highway that cut through miles of empty land. I had taken jobs like this many times before. Long distance, little traffic, not many towns, mostly dark stretches with small gas stations every 50 or 60 miles. The kind of road where the only light at night is your headlights and the faint red glow of your dashboard. The kind of road where silence feels heavy and thick, like air that refuses to move. I had left before sunset, thinking I would make good time before fatigue set in. The load was heavy, but my truck was strong, and everything seemed normal. The first few hours felt like any other run. I watched the sky change from soft blue to orange, then sink slowly into darker shades. The sun dropped behind low hills in the distance, and the world turned into a flat black space with long shadows and pale stars. The white lines on the road stretched forever in front of me. The engine hummed in a steady rhythm I knew well. The road surface had small cracks and uneven patches, but nothing unusual. I ate from a small plastic container I kept near the seat. I drank water and kept my hands steady on the wheel. Everything felt routine, almost dull. I felt like a part of the truck, just another moving piece. After a while, the traffic disappeared completely. There were no headlights ahead of me and none behind me. The road felt empty in a deep way, like I was the only person left on that stretch of land. My mirrors showed nothing but black space and the faint outline of the trailer behind me. Every sound from the truck seemed louder in the quiet. The vibration in the steering wheel felt stronger. The engine noise seemed deeper. The air felt colder inside the cab, even though I had the vents set low. I kept moving mile after mile, listening to nothing but the soft thump of the tires and the low rumble of the engine. That kind of silence does something to the mind. It makes thoughts wander into strange places. It makes small worries feel bigger. It makes every shadow look like it has something inside it. I kept telling myself it was just another run, just another night, just another lonely highway. Then I reached a section of road that looked different from the rest. The asphalt was rougher, darker, and uneven. The white paint lines were faded. The shoulders were narrow and dropped into gravel. There were no street lights, no reflectors, nothing to catch my eyes but the short, bright beam of my headlights. The land on both sides was flat and empty. No trees, no houses, no fences. Just open space stretching into darkness. That was when I noticed the strange feeling in the steering wheel. It was small at first, just a soft pull to the right, like the wind was pushing against the side of the trailer. I tightened my grip and corrected the wheel. The truck straightened out, and everything felt normal again. I thought maybe the road tilted slightly. That happens sometimes on older highways. I kept going. A few minutes later, the same pull happened again. This time it was stronger. The truck drifted toward the shoulder, and I felt a rough vibration from the right tires as they touched the edge of the road. I pulled the wheel left, steady but firm, bringing the truck back into the lane. My chest tightened a little. Something did not feel right. I slowed down slightly and kept my eyes locked on the mirrors and the road. I listened more carefully to the sound of the engine and the tires. I tried to feel every small shift in the frame, every vibration, every change in balance. I knew trucks well enough to understand that small problems on a quiet road can turn into big disasters if ignored. But everything sounded normal. The engine tone was steady. The trailer did not sway. The temperature gauge looked fine. Nothing obvious stood out, and yet something still felt wrong. The pull came back again. Slow, heavy, dragging to the right. Not sudden, not sharp. Just a steady tug that made my heart beat harder. I eased off the throttle and let the truck roll. The right side felt heavier. The trailer seemed to lean just a little. The steering wheel felt loose in my hands for 1 second, then tight again. Fear crept in, slow and cold, like water filling my chest. I knew I had to stop and check, but the shoulder was narrow, and the road behind me was long and empty. Stopping a heavy truck in a bad spot can be dangerous, even when nobody else is around. But pushing forward without knowing what was wrong could be worse. I looked ahead and saw nothing but darkness stretching forever. So I slowed even more and guided the truck onto the gravel shoulder as carefully as I could. The truck rolled to a stop. The cab shook lightly as the engine idled. The air inside felt still, heavy, thick with silence. I could feel my own heartbeat in my throat. I sat there for a moment, breathing slow, telling myself it was probably just a low tire or some uneven pavement. Something simple, something normal, something I could deal with. But my hands felt cold and damp against the steering wheel. I switched on the hazard lights and climbed down from the cab. The night air hit my face, cold and dry. The world outside felt bigger and emptier than it had looked through the windshield. The flashing orange lights bounced weakly across the gravel and the side of the trailer. The sound of the engine idling seemed louder out there, echoing into the dark open land. I walked along the side of the truck, feeling the gravel crunch under my boots. The smell of diesel hung in the air. I moved slowly, careful not to slip on the uneven ground. I touched the metal of the trailer as I passed, feeling its cold surface. I checked each tire on the right side first, running my hand along the rubber, pressing my weight gently against them. They all felt solid, firm, normal. No flat spots, no leaking air, nothing strange. I crouched down and looked under the frame, trying to see if anything was loose or bent. The shadows under the trailer looked deep and endless, like black holes I could fall into. The metal parts looked still and silent. I walked to the back and checked the trailer doors, the hinges, the locking bar. Everything was closed tight. I checked the left side too, even though the problem had felt like it came from the right. All the tires looked fine. The frame looked solid. There were no leaks, no grinding noises, no smell of burning rubber or oil. It was as if nothing was wrong at all, yet the feeling would not leave my chest. I stood there beside the trailer, with the flashing hazard lights throwing slow pulses of orange across the empty road, and I felt something strange. Not a presence, not anything supernatural, just a powerful awareness of how alone I was. No houses, no cars, no animals, just open land and silence swallowing everything beyond the small island of light around my truck. The darkness felt thick, like a wall just beyond my reach. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves, and walked back toward the cab. I told myself I was tired. I told myself the road was uneven, and my mind was exaggerating small problems. I climbed back into the seat and closed the door. The cab felt different now. Felt smaller, tighter, like the air had weight. I rested my hands on the wheel and sat still for a moment, listening again to the engine, the ventilation, the faint rattles of small objects inside the cab. I eased back onto the road and picked up speed slowly. First, everything felt smooth. The steering wheel stayed steady. The trailer rolled straight. I felt relief spread through me, but it did not last long. A few minutes later, the pull returned. Stronger this time, slow, heavy, dragging to the right like something deep beneath the truck was shifting out of place. My chest tightened again, and a wave of fear washed over me. I slowed down and kept both hands tight on the wheel. The pull grew worse. I felt the trailer tugging, like weight inside it was moving in a slow, unnatural way. But the load inside was packed and secured at the warehouse. It should not move like that. I had checked the paperwork. I had driven with loads like that many times before. Nothing about this made sense. Then I felt a sudden drop. Not big enough to throw me forward, but firm and deep, like one side of the truck had dipped down for half a second and come back up. My stomach twisted. I knew something serious was happening. I pictured a failing axle, a damaged suspension part, maybe a broken bracket somewhere along the trailer. Problems like that could tear apart a truck at high speed. They could flip a rig or break it in half. I eased onto the shoulder again, heart pounding harder than before. I brought the truck to a slow, careful stop and set the brake. My hands were shaking slightly. The night air outside looked darker now, like the world beyond the hazard lights had thickened into something heavier, but still just empty land and sky. I stepped out again and walked around the truck, slower this time, paying attention to every inch of metal, every bolt, every tire. I crouched down lower, crawled my hand under the suspension, felt along the lines, the brackets, the connections. My fingers brushed against cold steel, dust, and small bits of gravel. That was when I noticed the faint smell of something warm. Not burning, not smoke, just a faint warm scent, like hot rubber or heated metal. I leaned closer to the rear axle and felt a soft wave of heat coming from one of the hubs. Not glowing, not extreme, but still too warm compared to the others. I touched the metal carefully, pulling my hand back when the heat stung my skin. I realized one of the bearings might be failing, or something inside the hub was wearing down in a dangerous way. A failing hub can lock up without warning, can tear a wheel free or send the truck into a skid. I felt a deep unease settle in my stomach. I was miles from any town or rest stop. The nearest service area I remembered was at least 40 or 50 miles away. The idea of pushing forward with a failing part made my skin crawl, but staying there on a narrow shoulder in the middle of nowhere also felt wrong. I stood still beside the trailer, listening to the idle, watching the slow flash of the hazard lights, and thinking about everything that could go wrong if I made the wrong choice. The air felt colder. The sky looked deeper. The silence wrapped around me like a heavy blanket. I decided to move at a very slow speed and keep close watch on every feeling in the truck, hoping to reach a wider shoulder or a safer spot to fully stop. I climbed back in and started crawling forward. The truck rolled heavily, every small motion amplified by my fear. I watched the mirrors non-stop. I felt each vibration through the seat and the wheel. After a few minutes of creeping along, the road began to slope downward in a long, gentle descent. I kept my speed low, but gravity pulled on the trailer anyway. I felt the weight shift slightly, then again, then more. The right side tugged. The steering wheel fought my hands. The trailer leaned just enough to make my whole body tense up. Then it happened. A brief, sharp jolt came from the rear of the truck. Not loud, but strong, like a heavy metal piece had snapped or slipped into a new position. The whole truck shuddered for a split second. My heart felt like it stopped. I imagined the wheel locking, the axle braking, the trailer swinging sideways and dragging me into a violent roll across the road. But instead of braking, the truck steadied again. The pull faded. The steering wheel went still. The trailer rolled straight. The strange tension vanished. Everything suddenly felt smooth and normal again, as if nothing had ever been wrong. That should have made me feel better, but instead it terrified me even more. Mechanical problems do not just fix themselves like that. Loose parts do not magically settle into safe positions. Something had changed, but I had no idea what. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything before. The road stretched ahead like a dark ribbon, and I felt like I was driving over a thin layer of safety with a deep, unseen danger right beneath it. I kept moving slowly, alert and tense, watching for the next pull, the next vibration, the next sign of failure. But nothing happened. The truck rolled smooth for mile after mile. The fear in my chest did not fade. Instead, it turned into a dull, lingering weight, like a warning my body refused to ignore. After what felt like a long time, I finally reached a wider gravel turnout beside the road. I guided the truck into it and stopped. The space felt safer than the thin shoulder I had been using before. I turned off the engine and sat in silence. The sudden quiet inside the cab felt strange. My ears rang slightly. My body still felt like it was moving even though everything was still. I climbed out again and walked around the truck for the third time. I checked the hub that had been warm before. It still felt warm, but not hotter than earlier. I looked for cracks, leaks, loose bolts, anything that explained the jolt or the fading problem. I found nothing. Everything looked normal. I stood behind the trailer and looked out across the land. The horizon was nothing but darkness and empty space. I could hear the faint sound of wind moving across the open ground, but that was all. No animals, no cars, no voices, just isolation. I realized how fragile my situation really was. A machine made of thousands of parts, any one of them capable of failing, carrying a heavy load across a place where help would not arrive quickly. No magic, no monsters, no strange beings in the dark. Just physics, weight, time, metal, and my own body trapped between fear and responsibility. I stayed there for a long time, breathing slow, letting my nerves settle. Eventually, I started the engine again and drove the rest of the way to the nearest small rest area I remembered from the map. I took it slow and careful, ready to stop at any sign of trouble, but the truck stayed smooth for the rest of the drive. When I reached the rest area, I parked in the truck lane and finally allowed myself to relax a little. I checked the hub again after the metal cooled down. That was when I saw the faint line in the metal, a thin crack near the edge that had not been visible before. It was small but clear. The bearing housing had been failing from the inside. The jolt I felt earlier was likely the part shifting into a worse position, one moment away from locking up or breaking apart on the road. The realization sent a fresh wave of fear through me. If it had failed completely while I was still moving fast, the wheel might have locked or torn loose. The trailer might have twisted. The truck might have rolled. In that empty stretch of highway with no one else around, I could have died alone in the dark without anyone seeing it happen. The next morning, a repair service came to replace the damaged parts. The mechanic showed me the worn pieces, metal shaved thin, edges cracked, the inside scarred from heat and friction. It was a slow failure that had been building quietly over time, hidden inside the hub, waiting for the right moment to show itself. There was nothing supernatural about it. No ghosts, no strange forces, just a simple, real danger that hides inside machines we trust every day. A danger that waits until we are alone on a dark road, when every sound feels louder and every second feels longer. That night changed me. I still drive, but I never look at the road the same way. I never ignore small pulls in the wheel, small changes in sound, small shifts in weight. I understand now how close the line is between control and disaster, and how fear is not always something imaginary in the dark. Sometimes it is a quiet warning from deep inside metal and moving parts, reminding us how small we really are against weight, speed, and empty space. And the ending of that night was simple and clear. I did not crash. I did not die. I made it to safety. But I walked away with the knowledge that one small hidden failure almost ended everything, and that the scariest moments in life do not need ghosts or fantasy. They only need darkness, silence, distance, and the slow, unseen breaking of something you thought would hold forever. I had been driving long haul for over 12 years, and in all that time I thought I had seen it all. I had dealt with ice storms in Montana, heat waves in Texas, and endless stretches of empty desert in Nevada. I had faced nights so dark that the road ahead seemed like an endless black ribbon, pierced only by my headlights, and days so hot my tires hummed against the asphalt like a low, warning siren. But nothing I had experienced prepared me for that night. The night that made every routine mile feel like a test of endurance, sanity, and luck. I was hauling a load of refrigerated produce from Chicago to Dallas. The freight was perishable, and the client had made it very clear that any delay could cost them thousands. The trailer was fully loaded, the refrigeration unit humming steadily behind me, keeping the temperature at precisely 34 degrees Fahrenheit. I had checked everything twice: tire pressure, fuel, brake lines, and the engine. My rig was solid, a 2019 Peterbilt 579, and I prided myself on maintaining it better than most drivers did. I had started the trip mid-morning, leaving the industrial outskirts of Chicago just as the winter sun was beginning to dip below the horizon. The roads were busy at first, trucks and cars streaming in every direction, city lights flickering across buildings. I had a plan: push hard to get past St. Louis by midnight, then take a mandatory break. I had been on similar routes countless times, and I knew the stretches of I-55 southbound well. Still, there was a tension in the back of my mind, a creeping unease that I tried to ignore. The first part of the drive went smoothly. The highway gradually emptied as I left the suburban sprawl, replaced by long stretches of farmland, blackened under the night sky. My headlights cut swaths through the darkness, illuminating the occasional deer at the roadside or a distant farmstead. I listened to the engine, the hum of the trailer, and the occasional radio chatter from truckers ahead. The isolation had a rhythm of its own, a sense of calm that let me focus entirely on the road and the machine beneath me. By the time I hit the outskirts of southern Illinois, the traffic had thinned completely. It was around 11:30 p.m., and I was alone on a stretch of highway that seemed endless. The road was straight for miles, flanked by fields that rose and fell in dark waves under the low moonlight. I remember feeling a strange sense of vulnerability, not because I was scared of anything in particular, but because I was so exposed, so utterly alone with this massive vehicle and the unknown miles ahead. The radio crackled with distant voices, mostly other drivers checking in or reporting minor delays. I kept it on low volume, more for background noise than anything else. Then, about 15 miles past a small, unlit town called Pinckneyville, I noticed the first thing that didn't make sense. The highway, normally smooth asphalt, had an unusual patch of oil slicks that glimmered under my headlights. I slowed instinctively, even though my load was time-sensitive. As I approached, I saw tire tracks crossing them at odd angles, suggesting another truck had skidded recently. That was odd in itself, but what unnerved me more was the complete lack of other vehicles. Not even a car. The road was dead silent except for the hum of my rig. I thought maybe someone had lost control on the slick, and the authorities hadn't arrived yet. I kept my speed reasonable and drove past, watching my mirrors carefully. Everything seemed fine for the next mile or so, but then it happened. Out of nowhere, a figure appeared in the middle of the road. A man, maybe in his late 40s, wearing dark clothing that blended into the night. At first, I thought it was a hitchhiker, but the way he stood, rigid and immobile, didn't look right. My immediate reaction was to brake, but at the same time, I was hauling a heavy load and didn't want to jackknife the trailer. I swerved slightly, narrowly missing him. The man didn't move, didn't flinch. He just stood there, staring. I honked, flashed my high beams, anything to get him to move. After a tense moment, he stepped aside, letting me pass. My heart was hammering. I had dealt with deer, raccoons, and other animals on the road before, but a human standing like that, seemingly out of nowhere, was different. I tried to convince myself it was some local drunk or a worker who had wandered onto the highway. Still, I couldn't shake the image of him standing there, completely still, watching me as I passed. I pushed on, trying to focus on the drive. The night was long, and fatigue was starting to set in. My eyes felt heavy, but I forced myself to stay alert. The hours passed slowly, each mile adding to the sense of isolation. Around 2 a.m., I hit a stretch of road that was notorious among truckers. It was a winding 2-lane highway through a forested area, completely unlit, with sheer drops to one side and thick woods to the other. It was one of those roads that required constant attention because any mistake could be fatal. I slowed, careful around the curves, keeping my headlights at full beam. Then I noticed the second strange thing. A set of tire tracks that appeared to be following mine. At first, I thought it was my imagination, maybe a reflection from the wet asphalt. But over the next few miles, the tracks remained parallel, following me exactly. That made no sense. I was the only truck on this road. No one had passed me in hours. My chest tightened. I kept checking my mirrors, but all I could see was darkness, the faint glow of my taillights reflecting off the asphalt behind me. The anxiety started to build. I kept telling myself it was nothing, maybe a local farmer or another truck taking a side road. But the more I looked, the more convinced I became that something wasn't right. My pulse was racing. I adjusted the mirrors, checked the tires, made sure the trailer was tracking correctly. Everything was mechanically fine, but the feeling of being followed didn't go away. Every curve felt like it would reveal someone lurking, waiting. Hours passed like this. Every rustle in the woods, every shadow in the corner of my vision made me tense. My mind started playing tricks on me, imagining things that weren't there. I knew the fatigue was getting to me, but the fear was genuine. Around 4 a.m., I finally reached a small roadside truck stop, a dimly lit place with a few trucks parked outside. I pulled in, my hands shaking slightly as I parked. The stop was empty except for a lone attendant inside, sipping coffee behind a counter. I grabbed a soda from the machine, trying to steady myself, and took a long moment to breathe. It was while I was leaving the truck stop that the situation escalated. As I merged back onto the highway, I noticed a black SUV parked on the shoulder, just ahead. It wasn't moving. At first, I thought maybe it was someone else stopping for the night, but as I got closer, I saw movement inside. Two figures, seated, staring in my direction. My stomach dropped. I slowed slightly, keeping the rig steady, trying to see if it was just another driver. They didn't move, didn't react, just sat there. I passed cautiously, but as I looked in the mirror, I realized the SUV had turned and was following me. Panic set in. I was on a narrow highway with no immediate exits for miles. I could hear the low rumble of the SUV's engine in the distance behind me, growing closer. My mind raced. If they tried to force me off the road, I was in serious trouble. The weight of the trailer meant I couldn't maneuver quickly. I considered calling the police, but the area was notorious for poor cell coverage, and my GPS barely showed any signal. I had to think fast. I decided to use the truck's weight to my advantage. I increased speed slightly, keeping in the right lane, and watched for any opportunity to force them to pass me and reveal themselves. Around a bend, I spotted a wide shoulder leading into a small, deserted rest area. I signaled, slowed carefully, and pulled in. The SUV followed, stopping at the entrance. I kept the engine running, my hand hovering near the gearshift, ready to reverse if needed. I watched from the cab as the figures exited the SUV. They were young, maybe late 20s, wearing dark hooded jackets. My initial fear was that they might try to hijack me, and my adrenaline surged. I remembered every bit of advice veteran truckers had given me about situations like this. Keep moving if possible, don't engage, and always keep your vehicle between you and the threat. I stayed in the cab, keeping the doors locked, watching their movements carefully. After what felt like an eternity, they got back into the SUV and drove off slowly, keeping an eye on me. I waited until they were gone before pulling back onto the highway, my hands white on the steering wheel. The rest of the trip was tense, every shadow and glint in the mirrors making me flinch. I drove carefully, keeping my speed controlled, until the sun began to rise. The daylight brought relief and a sense of safety. By the time I reached Dallas, I was exhausted, my body tense from hours of fear and vigilance. I parked the rig at the delivery site, unloaded the produce, and double-checked every part of the truck before shutting it down. Later, when I reflected on that night, I realized the lesson was clear. Even experienced drivers, confident in their skills and rigs, are vulnerable in the wrong circumstances. Awareness, preparation, and cautious decision-making aren't just good habits, they're survival skills. I filed a detailed report about the SUV following me with local authorities, though I knew chances of identifying them were slim. The night stayed with me for weeks, the memory of isolation, the phantom tracks on the road, and the sheer weight of danger. But ultimately, the experience reinforced something I had always believed. No matter the fear, keeping your head, making measured decisions, and trusting your instincts can see you through even the scariest situations. I survived that night, the truck intact, my load delivered, and me reminded once again that life on the road is as unpredictable as it is unforgiving. I'd been driving trucks for nearly 15 years, and I'd seen just about everything a long-haul route could throw at you. Nights alone on the road, endless stretches of highway with nothing around but dark, flat land, and the occasional neon light of a diner or truck stop. I never liked night driving too much, but deadlines and loads didn't care if it was 2 a.m. or 2 p.m. I liked routine, I liked the hum of the engine, and I liked knowing that every stop had a predictable pattern. But that night broke every pattern I had ever known, and it almost broke me. It started as a routine trip. I was hauling a refrigerated load of produce from Texas to Michigan, mostly apples and some oranges. The trailer had temperature control, so I kept an eye on it constantly. I left Dallas in the early evening, trying to make it past Oklahoma City before I had to pull over for my mandated rest. I always did my best to stay ahead of the clock, because if I got behind, everything got harder. The roads were empty mostly at night, only a few other trucks and the occasional car cutting across the black highway. I don't remember exactly when the unease started. I had a long stretch of Interstate 35 ahead of me. It was dark, the only lights coming from my headlights and the occasional reflector on the guardrails. I noticed a car behind me that seemed to be following too closely. That wasn't unusual, lots of people drive too fast, tailgate, or just don't pay attention. But this one felt off. The driver didn't flash lights to pass, just stayed there, keeping pace. Every time I glanced in the mirrors, it was there. Always. Not passing, not turning off, not signaling, just following. I adjusted my speed a little, dropping it to 70. The car followed. I sped up slightly. The car followed. It didn't swerve around. No headlights overtaking me. Just behind, like a shadow that didn't blink. That's when the first real knot of fear formed in my stomach. I had done night hauls plenty of times, but this was different. There was something deliberate about it, something that didn't make sense. Usually, if someone's tailing you, they either pass or disappear. This one stayed silent, patient, constant. I passed the last exit before a stretch of highway that ran for miles without service stations or gas stations. My options were limited. Pulling over was dangerous. I could be trapped. I kept thinking through my choices, trying not to panic, trying to stay rational. I knew I could call the highway patrol, but this was Oklahoma. Night, sparse service. My phone reception was patchy. And even if I could call, how long would it take for anyone to show up on a lonely interstate? I kept driving. My hands were tight on the wheel, knuckles white, eyes scanning the mirrors constantly. I thought about flipping a switch, turning on hazard lights, slowing down, making the car pass, but I didn't want to give whoever it was any ideas. What if they were watching, waiting for me to make a move? I knew every rule of the road by instinct, every defensive tactic drilled into me over years. I kept moving, careful, calm in appearance even though my stomach was in knots. Hours passed. The stretch of highway was empty except for me and the car behind. Every town I passed seemed asleep. The rest areas were closed, the lights off, the concrete empty. I checked the mirrors again and again. I tried calling the dispatcher to tell them what was happening, but the line kept dropping. My phone battery was low. Anxiety began gnawing at me because I realized that if something happened, I was utterly alone. Then the rain started. At first, it was just a light drizzle, but it turned heavy fast. Windshield wipers slapped against the glass, reducing visibility to almost nothing. The reflection of the headlights in the wet road made it hard to see. I slowed down, adjusted my mirrors, and tried to keep the truck centered in the lane. That's when I realized the car wasn't just following. It was keeping pace exactly, maneuvering perfectly with me, matching my speed, as if reading my mind. My mind started racing. What if it wasn't just a person? What if it was someone waiting for the right moment? I remembered all the stories, all the warnings truckers whispered about. People who would attack trucks at night, people who knew how to force you off the road, people who could disable your truck and leave you stranded. Normally, I brushed those off. Experience teaches you that most of those stories are exaggeration. But this didn't feel like exaggeration. I considered an exit. But exits in the rain at night with a heavy trailer are tricky. You have to slow down carefully, navigate the ramp, and stop somewhere safe. Every exit I saw was dark, isolated, just strips of asphalt with a few dead streetlights. No trucks, no motels, nothing. I passed one anyway, hoping the driver would take the exit too. They didn't. Still behind me. By now, my heart was racing. Sweat ran down my neck. I had to think, had to strategize. I remembered something from training. Avoid isolated spots. Keep the truck moving. Don't make predictable maneuvers. But my options were dwindling. I was approaching a stretch of highway that ran along a narrow pass, high cliffs on one side, dense forest on the other. If something happened there, there'd be no escape. I considered calling 911 again. This time it connected, but the line was choppy. Highway patrol, I said quickly. I'm on I-35, southbound, near mile marker 177. There's a car following me. I don't know what they want. They're staying right behind me, not passing. I'm a trucker, alone. Please, I need help. The dispatcher's voice was calm, professional. Can you take the next exit safely? I glanced at the map on my phone. There was one about 3 miles ahead. Yes, I can. I'll slow down. Keep moving. Don't stop on the highway. We're dispatching a unit to your location. Stay on the line. I felt a tiny relief, but the tension didn't let up. 3 miles might as well have been 100. I kept driving carefully, slowing down, signaling, staying in the right lane. The car followed, unrelenting. My mind was racing, thinking about every possible scenario. People jumping out, someone ramming the truck, being forced off the road. All the worst-case things I'd ever imagined in my 15 years were playing in my head, looping endlessly. The rain was relentless now. Water sprayed from the trailer wheels, visibility was almost zero, and I could barely see the next exit until I was nearly on top of it. I slowed down, preparing the truck for the deceleration. My hands were trembling. Every instinct screamed at me to keep moving, keep the truck steady, and don't make sudden movements. The car behind? Still there, like a shadow that had latched onto me. I maneuvered the exit carefully. The wet asphalt made braking tricky, but I managed it without incident. As I approached the bottom of the ramp, I noticed headlights in the distance. Highway patrol. They were coming fast, flashing lights. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The car behind me hesitated, then sped up slightly. I realized then that they hadn't expected any police. I heard sirens through the rain and the roar of the patrol vehicle closing in. The car swerved, briefly, then peeled off down a side road, disappearing into the night. The patrol truck pulled up alongside me. 2 officers inside, their faces tight with concern. I didn't even have to explain. The way I'd driven, the urgency in my voice over the radio, said it all. They signaled me to follow them. I did, carefully, feeling the weight of relief and exhaustion crashing down on me. We drove together to the nearest truck stop. I pulled in, shut off the engine, and just sat there, hands shaking, staring out the windshield at the empty, wet asphalt. Felt surreal. I kept checking the rearview mirror. Nothing. The car that had haunted me for hours was gone. Maybe they had seen the patrol lights and fled. Maybe they had been waiting to see if I made a mistake. I'll never know. I spent the rest of the night at that truck stop, engine off, lights low, checking the trailer and the truck repeatedly. Couldn't sleep, not really. I didn't drive again that night. I waited for sunrise, the roads lighter, the visibility better. I felt safe again once daylight came, even though my body was drained. The rest of the trip was uneventful, but that night stuck with me. It wasn't a ghost, it wasn't something supernatural. It was a real human threat, patient, calculating, and willing to wait for the right moment. The worst part was the randomness of it, the uncertainty. I knew then that no matter how experienced you are, how many miles you've driven, you are always vulnerable on the road. When I finally reached Michigan, delivered the load, and parked the truck for the week, I couldn't shake the memory of that car following me in the rain. I thought about the people who attack trucks, the dangers we take for granted, the small margins between life and disaster on the open road. I wrote down everything that happened in my log, filed a report with the company, and made sure to check in with the police. They thanked me for being alert and reported the suspicious car. I never saw it again. Changed the way I drove. I became more cautious at night, more aware of surroundings, more deliberate about exits, phone signals, and highway patrol coverage. That night taught me that routine can be broken at any moment, and when it is, only your instincts, experience, and calm under pressure will see you through. I survived because I stayed focused, followed procedure, and didn't panic. It was a hard lesson, but one I carry with me every mile I drive. Even now, years later, every time I see a car tailing me at night, my chest tightens, and I check every mirror, every shadow, every reflection. I learned something vital that night. Fear is real, the road is real, and the only thing between you and disaster is your mind, your skill, and a little bit of luck. I have been a trucker for over 15 years, driving across countless highways, back roads, and mountain passes, hauling everything from frozen food to construction equipment. I have seen and experienced things most people never even think about. Some nights, I drove through quiet, empty stretches of highway where the dark pressed in so heavily that it felt like it could reach into my cab and touch me. I always thought I was careful, alert, and experienced enough to handle anything. But there was one run I made last spring that changed the way I viewed the road, the night, and the people around me. I still think about it even now, more than half a year later. It started in the late evening. I was leaving a warehouse in Illinois, loaded with a full trailer of industrial supplies bound for a construction site in upstate New York. The dispatcher had told me it was a tight schedule, but nothing I hadn't handled before. The roads were wet from a light rain, slick in spots, and the wind gusted along the interstate in the way that makes your trailer sway just enough to remind you that you are driving something enormous, something with no room for error. I made sure my lights were on, double-checked my mirrors, and eased onto the highway. The first few hours went smoothly. The rain eased up, leaving the roads shiny and reflective under the glow of my headlights. I could see for miles, and there was little traffic. I took comfort in the routine, check the mirrors, adjust the wheel, monitor the gauges, and keep my mind alert. Trucker life is mostly about monotony, but the monotony is deceptive. You have to stay focused because a single mistake, a second of distraction, can end everything. Around midnight, I reached a stretch of highway that ran along the edge of a forested area. It was the kind of place where there were no towns for miles, no rest stops, just asphalt cutting through endless trees. The wind was picking up again, and the sound of it against the cab was constant, almost like a low roar. I noticed a pickup truck behind me, its headlights bright but not aggressive, keeping pace with my speed. It wasn't unusual. Trucks often get tailgate or joined by other drivers on long hauls. I didn't pay much attention. As the miles passed, the pickup stayed unusually close. Too close. I caught glimpses of it in my mirrors, and it seemed like the driver was watching me, not just driving. I tried to dismiss it, telling myself it was nothing. I have been on the road long enough to know that overthinking can make harmless things feel threatening. But a creeping unease started to settle in. The way the headlights followed me, the slight jerks as it accelerated and slowed, the way it mimicked my movements, it felt deliberate. I decided to take a break at the next rest area, about 15 miles ahead. I eased my rig onto the exit ramp, careful to slow the trailer smoothly, and pulled into an empty lot. I shut down the engine, but my heart kept beating fast. I watched through the windshield as the pickup stopped a few spaces away. The driver didn't get out, just sat there, engine running, staring. I locked my doors, grabbed my flashlight, and walked around to check my trailer. Everything was in order. Nothing was missing, nothing tampered with. When I got back in the cab, the pickup was gone. I exhaled, trying to convince myself I had imagined it. I stayed parked for about 45 minutes, checking the lot periodically. When I finally felt calm enough, I restarted my truck and eased back onto the highway. I kept my eyes on the mirrors, but the road was empty. It should have been over, but it wasn't. About an hour later, as I was passing through a particularly remote stretch of road in upstate New York, I noticed headlights behind me again. The same pickup, same bright lights, same eerie proximity. I checked my GPS. The next town was still 20 miles away, the rest areas sparse and far apart. I kept my speed steady, tried not to panic. The highway curves in this area with tight bends and long shadows from the trees. Every time I passed a curve, I caught the pickup following precisely, never losing sight of me. That's when it got worse. I noticed a movement in the shadows along the tree line. I couldn't see much, but it looked like someone was moving fast, running parallel to the highway in the dark. I adjusted my mirrors to focus, but the figure disappeared as quickly as it appeared. I kept driving, telling myself it was probably another driver or an animal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched in a very deliberate way. I decided not to stop until I reached the next town, but the pickup didn't let up. It stayed right behind me, following every curve, every slight change in speed. I started thinking about the worst-case scenarios. Being a trucker, I know that you're always a target for robbery or worse, especially on empty highways late at night. My mind went through the possibilities, calculating the risk of each. I kept my hands tight on the wheel and my eyes glued to the mirrors. By the time I reached the outskirts of the town, I could see the lights of a small diner and a gas station. I knew this area well. I had stopped here many times. I made a quick decision to pull into the gas station, intending to fill up and wait for the pickup to move on. As I slowed down, I watched the mirrors. The pickup didn't enter the station. Instead, it stayed on the highway, just past the exit, like it was waiting for me to leave. I felt a knot in my stomach tighten. I've been a long-haul trucker for over a decade. The road has been my life, my home, and at times, my worst nightmare. Most days, it's routine. The hum of the engine, the rhythmic sway of the cab, the endless stretch of asphalt beneath my wheels. But there's a part of trucking that people never talk about, the part that tests you not with traffic or weather, but with isolation, fatigue, and the unknown. I learned that lesson one autumn night on a route I thought I knew well. Started around mid-October. The air was sharp and cold, carrying the kind of bite that cut through the cabin even with the heater on full. My load was heavy, a shipment of industrial equipment destined for a small town in the northern Midwest, over 500 miles from my starting point. I had left late in the afternoon, hoping to make decent time before nightfall. The first few hours were normal. The truck hummed smoothly, the diesel engine vibrating just enough to remind me it was alive, and the highway was sparsely populated, dotted with a few trucks here and there. By the time I hit the stretch that wound through the hills and dense forest, darkness had fully taken over. The road was narrow, 2 lanes each way, with sharp curves and no shoulder in some places. My headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the asphalt and the occasional reflective road sign. I had been on this road before multiple times, but night changes everything. Shadows play tricks on your eyes, and the isolation makes every sound louder than it is. I always drove cautiously here, but that night, I felt an unease I couldn't shake. The first sign that something was off came from the road conditions. There had been recent rains, and a slick layer of moisture made the curves dangerous. I slowed down, keeping a hand on the wheel, gripping it just enough to feel connected but not tense. That's when I saw it. A figure standing by the side of the road, barely visible in the dim glow of my headlights. At first, I thought it was a stranded driver, maybe someone whose car had broken down. But as I got closer, I realized there was no car, no emergency flare, nothing but this lone human shape, completely still. My instincts screamed to keep going, but part of me slowed automatically, assessing the situation. The figure didn't move. It didn't wave. It was like a statue frozen in place. Then, almost imperceptibly, it shifted. Not in a normal way, but in a way that made my gut tighten. The body didn't move fluidly. It was jerky, unbalanced, like it had no control. I felt a wave of panic, but pushed it down, reasoning with myself. Maybe it was someone disoriented, someone who had been walking for hours. The thought barely settled before the truck in front of me, a large rig, swerved suddenly to avoid the same figure. I heard the screech of tires, a loud clang as it clipped the guardrail, and a thundering crash echoed in the hills. I slammed on my brakes, heart racing, my hands slick with sweat. By the time I stopped, the figure was gone. No one was there. The other truck had disappeared into the darkness after regaining control, leaving nothing behind except a faint smell of burnt rubber and the echo of what could have been disaster. My mind raced, trying to process what I had seen. There was no logical explanation, at least none that made sense at the moment. I shook my head, telling myself I was imagining things, that fatigue was playing tricks on me. I turned the heater up, sat back, and tried to regain focus, my knuckles white as I gripped the wheel. The next stretch of the road was worse. It was remote, cutting through a patch of forest that seemed endless. No towns, no gas stations, just the black canopy above and the asphalt winding like a snake. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was out there watching. Every time a shadow crossed the edge of my headlights, my pulse jumped. I tried to focus on the road, on the rhythm of the tires against the asphalt, but my mind kept drifting back to that figure. I had been on this road countless times, and I knew the curves and dips, but nothing had ever made me feel this vulnerable. It was somewhere around 2 a.m. when the truck started acting up. A warning light flickered on the dashboard. The trailer brakes were not responding correctly. I cursed under my breath, knowing I couldn't stop easily on these curves. I checked the gauges, the air pressure, everything seemed fine. Still, the warning persisted. I slowed further, keeping my eyes on the road, scanning for the next pull-off. In this area, there weren't many. One wrong move, and the truck would slide off the asphalt into the steep, forested valley below. I had done the math in my head hundreds of times. At this weight, with these brakes, sliding off the road would almost certainly be fatal. As I rounded a particularly tight curve, I saw something that made me freeze entirely. A deer, or what looked like a deer, was standing dead in the middle of the lane. Its body was twisted, limbs bent at unnatural angles. The headlights reflected off its glassy eyes, giving it a look that made my stomach turn. I swerved instinctively, tires screeching, barely avoiding the carcass. My truck fishtailed slightly on the wet surface, and I had to fight to keep control. The brakes felt different, heavier, almost unresponsive. Heart hammering, I maneuvered past the corpse, my hands shaking uncontrollably. The smell hit me next, a rancid mix of rot and wet fur, and I gagged as I drove on. I didn't stop, couldn't. Stopping meant being vulnerable, and right then, I felt extremely exposed. The forest pressed close, the trees like dark sentinels on either side of the road. The road narrowed further, and patches of ice had started forming where the asphalt dipped in shadows. I fought the truck through each curve, shifting gears, pumping brakes, trying to control speed without losing traction. Every mile felt like hours. My mind was on high alert, scanning every shadow, every reflective road marker, for any sign of danger. Then the radio crackled, not in the usual static way, but in sharp, distorted bursts of sound. It wasn't a voice, just noise, a series of high-pitched squeals that made my teeth ache. I tried adjusting the channels, turning the volume down, but it persisted. The truck seemed to vibrate differently, almost as if the static from the radio was reverberating through the cab and the frame. I had no idea what was happening. Fatigue was hitting hard, but this wasn't just tiredness. It was a primal sense of wrongness, a danger I couldn't explain. I pressed on, knowing I had to make it to the next rest stop. In the distance, I saw the faint glow of lights, gas station signs, maybe 20 miles away. It was a relief I didn't realize I was craving until that moment. I adjusted my speed, leaning on the engine, careful to maintain enough momentum to navigate the curves but not too fast to lose control. As I got closer, I noticed something odd. The lights were dim, flickering like old bulbs. The building itself seemed abandoned, paint peeling, windows clouded with grime. Yet there was activity, or at least the sense of it. Shadows moving inside, figures crossing from window to window, though I couldn't make out exactly what they were. I decided not to stop. I needed fuel, sure, but this place didn't feel right. I circled slowly, scanning the area, and noticed that one of the pumps had fresh scratches, deep marks that looked like clawed lines, not mechanical damage. I couldn't explain it, but my instinct screamed to keep moving. I punched the accelerator and left the place behind, feeling relief mixed with unease as I returned to the road. The stretch after that was even worse. The asphalt had deteriorated badly, potholes hidden in the shadows, gravel strewn across curves. I swerved repeatedly, my hands aching, eyes dry and gritty from staring into darkness for hours. By 4:30 a.m., I had entered a valley. The road dipped sharply, winding like a ribbon through the trees. A low fog had started forming, clinging to the ground, turning everything into vague shapes. Visibility was almost zero. I drove with extreme caution, hugging the center line, trying to anticipate every curve, every dip. Then, the truck's headlights caught movement. An animal, maybe a coyote or a wolf, darting across the road. My brakes barely responded, the wheels skidding on the slick surface. The truck groaned, metal scraping as it twisted slightly, and I had to wrestle it back onto the road. That close call left my hands trembling, and I had to pull over to catch my breath. I leaned back in the seat, feeling my heart pound, sweat soaking my shirt, and tried to steady my breathing. I knew I couldn't stop for long. I was alone, miles from the nearest town, and exhaustion was crushing me. My mind drifted to worst-case scenarios, losing control, sliding into the ditch, something else appearing on the road that I wouldn't see in time. I looked at the fuel gauge. barely half a tank. That meant I had to push forward, keep moving until I could find a real, functioning gas station. I restarted the truck, the engine's vibrations a strange comfort, and pressed on through the fog and darkness. It was around 5:15 a.m. when I finally saw the lights of a highway rest stop in the distance. The sun was just starting to lighten the sky, painting the horizon in shades of gray and orange. Relief washed over me. I had survived the night, and I could finally rest, refuel, and check the brakes properly. Pulling in, I noticed the other trucks parked there, drivers already emerging from cabs, stretching, grabbing coffee. No one else had the haunted look I had. I felt drained, my body tense, my nerves shot. I parked in a corner, turned off the engine, and sat for a long time, staring at the dashboard. The rest stop itself wasn't much, but it was functional. I filled the tank, checked the brakes, and went through the cab to make sure everything was in order. Tires looked fine, air pressure stable, brakes fully responsive. I took a moment outside, feeling the crisp morning air on my face, appreciating the normalcy of the world. The sun had risen fully by now, and the road ahead seemed tame compared to what I had survived. I knew I would still have to drive hundreds of miles, but the immediate danger, the tension of that night, had passed. I took the time to rest, nap in the sleeper cab, and eat something solid. By the time I left the rest stop, I felt like a different driver, alert, cautious, but no longer overwhelmed by fear. The night had been a trial, a reminder of how quickly things can go wrong on the road and how much isolation magnifies every danger. I kept my eyes open, but I no longer felt hunted or paranoid. The highway stretched ahead, normal trucks sharing the lanes, sunlight glinting off windshields, the world slowly waking up. When I finally arrived at my destination in the small town, the relief was immense. Unloading the shipment went smoothly, and for the first time in hours, I felt safe. I documented every incident in my logbook, notes for myself and for dispatch about the hazards I had encountered. The night had been terrifying, yes, but it was over. I had survived, and that survival, despite exhaustion, uncertainty, and the unknown, gave me a sense of accomplishment. It reminded me that trucking isn't just about moving freight. It's about navigating unpredictability, managing danger, and trusting your skills and instincts. I drove home after a short rest, keeping the lessons of that night in mind. The dark curves, the strange figure, the abandoned gas station, and the slick asphalt had all tested me, but I had come through. I knew that no matter how long I drove, how well I planned, or how experienced I was, the road would always have the power to surprise and frighten. But it also had the power to teach endurance, patience, and respect for the world outside the cab. That night stayed with me, a vivid memory of fear and relief, a reminder that even in the darkest stretches, persistence and focus can bring you through. I've been a long-haul trucker for over a decade. The road has been my life, my home, and at times, my worst nightmare. Most days, it's routine. The hum of the engine, the rhythmic sway of the cab, the endless stretch of asphalt beneath my wheels. But there's a part of trucking that people never talk about, the part that tests you not with traffic or weather, but with isolation, fatigue, and the unknown. I learned that lesson one autumn night on a route I thought I knew well. Started around mid-October. The air was sharp and cold, carrying the kind of bite that cut through the cabin even with the heater on full. My load was heavy, a shipment of industrial equipment destined for a small town in the northern Midwest, over 500 miles from my starting point. I had left late in the afternoon, hoping to make decent time before nightfall. The first few hours were normal. The truck hummed smoothly, the diesel engine vibrating just enough to remind me it was alive, and the highway was sparsely populated, dotted with a few trucks here and there. By the time I hit the stretch that wound through the hills and dense forest, darkness had fully taken over. The road was narrow, 2 lanes each way, with sharp curves and no shoulder in some places. My headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the asphalt and the occasional reflective road sign. I had been on this road before multiple times, but night changes everything. Shadows play tricks on your eyes, and the isolation makes every sound louder than it is. I always drove cautiously here, But that night, I felt an unease I couldn't shake. The first sign that something was off came from the road conditions. There had been recent rains, and a slick layer of moisture made the curves dangerous. I slowed down, keeping a hand on the wheel, gripping it just enough to feel connected but not tense. That's when I saw it. A figure standing by the side of the road, barely visible in the dim glow of my headlights. At first, I thought it was a stranded driver, maybe someone whose car had broken down. But as I got closer, I realized there was no car, no emergency flare, nothing but this lone human shape, completely still. My instincts screamed to keep going, but part of me slowed automatically, assessing the situation. The figure didn't move. It didn't wave. It was like a statue frozen in place. Then, almost imperceptibly, it shifted. Not in a normal way, but in a way that made my gut tighten. The body didn't move fluidly. It was jerky, unbalanced, like it had no control. I felt a wave of panic, but pushed it down, reasoning with myself. Maybe it was someone disoriented, someone who had been walking for hours. The thought barely settled before the truck in front of me, a large rig, swerved suddenly to avoid the same figure. I heard the screech of tires, a loud clang as it clipped the guardrail, and a thundering crash echoed in the hills. I slammed on my brakes, heart racing, my hands slick with sweat. By the time I stopped, the figure was gone. No one was there. The other truck had disappeared into the darkness after regaining control, leaving nothing behind except a faint smell of burnt rubber and the echo of what could have been disaster. My mind raced, trying to process what I had seen. There was no logical explanation, at least none that made sense at the moment. I shook my head, telling myself I was imagining things. That fatigue was playing tricks on me. I turned the heater up, sat back, and tried to regain focus, my knuckles white as I gripped the wheel. The next stretch of the road was worse. It was remote, cutting through a patch of forest that seemed endless. No towns, no gas stations, just the black canopy above and the asphalt winding like a snake. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was out there watching. Every time a shadow crossed the edge of my headlights, my pulse jumped. I tried to focus on the road, on the rhythm of the tires against the asphalt, but my mind kept drifting back to that figure. I had been on this road countless times, and I knew the curves and dips, but nothing had ever made me feel this vulnerable. It was somewhere around 2 a.m. when the truck started acting up. A warning light flickered on the dashboard. The trailer brakes were not responding correctly. I cursed under my breath, knowing I couldn't stop easily on these curves. I checked the gauges, the air pressure, everything seemed fine. Still, the warning persisted. I slowed further, keeping my eyes on the road, scanning for the next pull-off. In this area, there weren't many. One wrong move, and the truck would slide off the asphalt into the steep, forested valley below. I had done the math in my head hundreds of times. At this weight, with these brakes, sliding off the road would almost certainly be fatal. As I rounded a particularly tight curve, I saw something that made me freeze entirely. A deer, or what looked like a deer, was standing dead in the middle of the lane. Its body was twisted, limbs bent at unnatural angles. The headlights reflected off its glassy eyes, giving it a look that made my stomach turn. I swerved instinctively, tires screeching, barely avoiding the carcass. My truck fishtailed slightly on the wet surface, and I had to fight to keep control. The brakes felt different, heavier, almost unresponsive. Heart hammering, I maneuvered past the corpse, my hands shaking uncontrollably. The smell hit me next, a rancid mix of rot and wet fur, and I gagged as I drove on.